Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate everyone bringing their questions. My name is Hunter Rayleigh. I'm with Small Business Majority. Before we dive into this Q&A with Congressman Jason Crow, I just want to acknowledge several of our other partners that are co-sponsoring this event. Rocky Mountain MicroFinance Institute, Fax Aurora, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, Best for Colorado, and Colorado Lending Source. And then we have two of our other partners on stage that I'm going to give a quick second to introduce themselves. So I'll kick it over to Karen before we dive right in.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Muldovan, and I'm the Director of Policy with Good Business Colorado. Thrilled to be here. Just so folks know, Good Business Colorado is a statewide, nonpartisan business association. We have over 240 values-driven business owners who are really committed to working together to build a prosperous, equitable, and sustainable Colorado. So we're thrilled just to have this opportunity to have the conversation with Congressman Crow today, and we know we have a lot to cover, so I will kick it over to some of the other folks.
Great, thank you. My name is Alex Wise. I'm the Executive Director of CEDS Finance. We are a micro lender providing small business debt capital up to $50,000 for the Denver metro area, and we are based in Aurora. We are a nonprofit, and all of our loans come with free technical assistance to help our borrowers and help our clients. Thank you.
Great. So thank you all. And before we dive in, I have the first question loaded up. For the participants on the side, if you want to type in your question, and then we will ask that to the congressman as we go along. In the course of asking your question, please let us know what industry you're in. And if you live in Congressional District 6, let us know that as well. Just very quickly, Congressman Jason Crow is a member of the House Small Business Committee. And right now, given everything that's going on, I just wanted to give everybody the opportunity to ask some questions about the current state of their business, expectations moving forward, or any other considerations that we should be thinking about. So with that, I'll just, Congressman, the first question is, oh, and it looks like we lost him briefly. The first question going out, Justin or Veronica, is just the quick update on what's going on currently in DC, how you guys are thinking about moving forward now that we've gone through PPP, EIDL loans, and several rounds of stimulus.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. This is Justin. I'm the Congressman's legislative director here in Washington, D.C. And looks like the Congressman's rejoining.
Hi, all. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The system, the platform we're using appears to be kicking me off every couple minutes. So we'll just keep going here, and hopefully it keeps me on this time. So thanks, Hunter and Karen, for moderating. Thank you to Small Business Majority and Good Business Colorado and all the other partners, Best for Colorado, CEDS Finance, the Black Chamber of Commerce, Colorado Lending Source, Fax Aurora, and Rocky Mountain MicroFinance for your support. You all are doing incredible work, standing in the breach for our small businesses right now. We're really in an unprecedented situation. It's been 102 years since we have had a global health pandemic of this nature. It wasn't has been since 1918, the Spanish flu, since we've dealt with something of this nature from a health perspective. And it's been about 90 years since we've dealt with an economic crisis of this magnitude, with over 30 million Americans having filed for unemployment insurance in the last 5 weeks, about 13 to 15% real unemployment at this point. But what we haven't ever encountered is both of those things at the same time, both a health crisis and a economic crisis simultaneously. So this is really requiring an all hands on deck effort. We passed our fourth stimulus bill last week. That was Stimulus 4. We're working on a fifth one, which will be CARES Act 2.0, which we're hoping to bring to the floor of the House the week of March 11th. And we're working very hard to do that. But the focus of me and my office, since I sit on the Small Business Committee, has been on really helping our small businesses with the EIDL loan program in the PPP, making sure that we are plussing the PPP up, we're funding it with as much money as we can, but that it's also operating as effectively as it can as well. I mean, we have seen an influx of applications to both of these programs, unlike anything the SBA has ever seen before. A massive influx of applications, and we need to kind of build the airplane while it's flying and vastly expand the pipeline and the resources of SBA so it can handle this influx of applications, fund the PPP and the EIDL program, and conduct oversight to make sure that it's working the way that it should be, and we're preventing as many abuses as we can that you have all heard of, on the news. These larger companies that have been applying for and getting millions of dollars. We're trying to address that issue as well. So a lot going on. And we're also trying to address the issue of the health crisis, because we do not have a national testing program at this point. We need to vastly expand our testing. And we also need to expand the healthcare professionals to actually conduct that testing, that surveillance, and that contact tracing that's necessary to actually get our arms around this. Most medical professionals are indicating that it's going to take anywhere from 1 to 2 years to actually create a vaccine. So we're not going to get back to normal, and that is where we were in December and January, where people can go and just go about their lives without having to worry about this virus. We won't get back to that until we have a vaccine that's safe and effective, and we're able to vaccinate all Americans. And that's about 1 to 2 years out, is what most people are telling us. But we can get back as close to normal as possible, an 80 or 90% solution with social distancing and other measures, if and only if we have good testing, we have healthcare professionals and public health agencies that can do contact tracing and make sure that people are isolated and quarantined that need to be. And if we have those things in place, then we can start vastly expanding the lifting of these orders and returning to as close to normal as we can. So we're working really hard to make sure we're putting the infrastructure in place to do all of those things. So with that said, I'm going to spend most of our time addressing questions and having more of a conversation. I think the last thing I will say is I will invite all of you who are having problems, who are residents or constituents of the 6th District or our businesses in the 6th District, to contact our office. Call our DC office or our Aurora office. And we can do 2 things. Number one, if you have ideas for legislation or issues that are not being addressed, we are crowdsourcing that. That is the power of democracy here, is we've already gotten several amazing ideas from the district that we've actually turned into legislation that we've introduced on the floor. So if you have ideas on how to address this, I want to hear those. But also, if you need help applying for these programs, navigating the SBA, working with the small business development centers, or doing anything that involves getting direct support or dealing with an agency, we would love to hear from you, and we can help you work through that process. So with that said, I will turn it back over to you, and would love to hear what's on everyone's mind and take questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview. I think that was just really helpful framing for the rest of our conversation. And we're getting lots of good questions in the chat box. I think I'm going to start with one, though, that might be on a lot of people's minds right now. Certainly, we're seeing a lot of attention in the media about some of these large, multi-million-dollar corporations who have been able to access the PPP loan when a lot of small businesses feel shut out. So the question is specifically on regulation. What are we able to do at the federal level to make sure that those dollars are going where they were really intended? I know there's been some kind of social media pressure to put the spotlight on these companies, and some have been given it back. But what are we doing to actually regulate this to ensure that we're not widening social gaps and disparities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And my stomach was churning when I read those news articles and heard the stories of some of those other big companies that really were abusing this program. Right? These are programs that are designed to help small businesses, businesses under 500 employees. And some of them were taking advantage of this loophole that would allow companies that have franchises or affiliations in any one franchise or location had under 500, that's not what they were intended for. Several of those companies have returned that money. But here's what we need to do. Number one, we need to figure out as Congress how we can reconvene our committees and start conducting our regular order of business and doing it in a safe and effective way so that we can conduct our oversight, our necessary committee oversight. Because one of the most powerful tools we have is the ability to subpoena these businesses, subpoena bankers and others, and call them in and conduct a public hearing about what's going on, to tell that story publicly, get the word out, and to work on closing those loopholes. So that's the thing that we need to do. And I'm working with the chair of the Small Business Committee to figure out how we can get back to doing that in the next few weeks. The second thing is we have to address with the Senate, because Marco Rubio is the chair of the Senate Small Business Committee. We have to close some of these existing loopholes. Now, they were unwilling to do that in our last stimulus package. When we voted last week to plus up the program by $310 billion, we wanted to make sure that we were closing some of those loopholes that people were abusing. The Senate was unwilling to do that. So we're going to have to go back to the well again and try to do that in the next round. But what I will say is, there is a requirement in the PPP, and many of you are familiar with this. This is the 75%, 25% requirement, where 75% of that money has to go directly to payroll, and only 25% can be used for overhead expenses, namely mortgage, rent, and utilities. So that is both a challenging requirement because there are businesses and groups that cannot comply with that, like churches and veteran service organizations and others that need that relief, and we need to try to figure out a way to get them that relief. But that requirement is in place actually for a good reason. And what it means is that money is going to employees. It's going to payroll and to keep people on the job, and that's the intent of the program. So even in those cases, that money is going to keep people on payroll and going directly to rank and file folks who need it the most. So there is a tension there between making sure we keep a requirement that is working and keeping people employed, but also excluding folks in the program that need that program. So we need to figure out how we reconcile both of those things. And I will say we got some numbers this week about PPP, and there are abuses that we need to address and we need to stop. There's no doubt about it. But in Colorado alone, it looks as though the PPP program has been able to save upwards of 500,000 jobs, keep 500,000 Coloradans on payroll and keep money flowing to their accounts, which is a really good thing. And I think we have to recognize that we are helping the economy and helping those folks by doing it.
Great. Thank you so much. Who's going to pick the next question?
Alex, I think you're on mute.
All right. Sorry, I didn't have a question queued up. Let's see. I'm sorry.
While you're finding it, Alex, I can jump in and ask a quick question that I think is on a lot of folks' mind, particularly with PPP. So you had mentioned that, and the goal of that program is to keep people employed and keep people attached to their employer. But a lot of folks, some things that don't come up and that aren't covered in that loan are generally like overhead expenses, and especially in an area like Denver and Aurora in the metro region where rent on commercial property can be extremely high. Is anything being thought of that can support folks that extends beyond just immediate payroll costs and may position them to be in a good place to either open or at least get somewhat back to normal as they resume operations or attempt to?
Yeah, great question. And you're right in that, a program this big that we're trying to create to deal with an emergency, and we're doing it very fast, has gaps. And I think nobody on either side of the aisle in Congress is saying that this is a perfect program. And there are certainly things we need to fix. And, the overhead expenses is one of those, the inability of certain nonprofits and faith organizations and others who rely very heavily on volunteers and don't have substantial payroll They can't apply for the forgivable loans under that program, and that's another problem. There is the EIDL loan program, so the emergency disaster loans and grants, where the first 10,000 is grant and then the rest is loan. That program is designed and would address some of the instances where you don't need to keep your payroll going, right? Because there's a lot of businesses that have already laid off employees, and there are a lot who are not going to open up at least in the next couple of weeks or couple of months. So the PPP doesn't address them, and that is where the EIDL grants and loans are supposed to address some of the issue. But again, it doesn't address all of it. So we'd love to hear from you on what the gaps are as we look at the fifth stimulus bill and where we need to address needs more so than we have, because there's a lot and the needs are deep. We know that. We're not hitting all of the need. So we do want to hear from you if you have ideas on how we can expand programs or even create new ones to fill those gaps.
Sure. So Alex, I think that kind of touches on one of the questions that you personally had as a community-based lender.
Absolutely. I think there are a range of different products for different organizations. But one of the things as a community organization that are kind of a more grassroots nonprofit-based organization is the need to have loan loss reserves. So if there are significant defaults in our portfolio, that we have the reserves to kind of keep our organizations upright and stable. Is there any discussions of supporting or kind of backstopping the loan loss reserves for the current lenders in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's a good question. We'll have to look into that. So I'll have Justin, who I know is on the call, and others and my legislative staff check in with the committees of jurisdictions. I know that those discussions are going on right now. And see if that is a big part of the discussion and what current plans are in place. That would fall primarily under the jurisdiction of the Financial Services Committee that I don't sit on, but we'd be happy to reach out to that committee and see what they're doing to address that concern and get back with all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Congressman. This is Karen again with Good Business Colorado. Another question that we're seeing is around what sort of assistance or guidance or regulations can happen at the federal level to address issues that small businesses are having paying their commercial rent? We've had some small businesses who've had landlords who've really worked with them and have certainly understood the situation that we're all in nationally. But there's unfortunately some landlords who haven't and have just said, doesn't matter if your business is open or not, need rent paid in full, this date, no exceptions, which is just very challenging for some of our small businesses. So, we know this can be a larger issue related to, if there's a mortgage on the commercial property, but just curious as to what sort of dialogue is happening around rent assistance, rent abatement, and this issue of commercial mortgage relief.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the third stimulus, what we did was pass a requirement that if landlords or mortgagors have a federally backed loan, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or et cetera, that they cannot evict or foreclose on anybody for non-payment during this crisis. So we wanted to provide that immediate relief. Now that doesn't address all of it, obviously. That addresses part of the challenge because that rent still accrues. I would like to see an element of loan forgiveness or forbearance, or I'm sorry, rent or mortgage forgiveness or forbearance for certain businesses and individuals, particularly smaller businesses, those who are most vulnerable, who are losing income. So it's not a matter of you're going to be able to pay 4 or 5 months rent in whole at the end of a 4 or 5 month period, even if we have a temporary halt on evictions and foreclosures, because that's not going to solve the issue, right? If you don't have any revenue, you're not going to have it in 4 or 5 months, just like you don't have it now, and you're not building up any type of bank account to pay that in 4 or 5 months. So I think we need to take a really hard look at some forgiveness and forbearance on rents and mortgages to make sure that we're not creating a problem in the midterm that we're trying to solve in the near term as well. And that's something that I've talked to some of the committees about. People are interested in it within my caucus, and I think you can expect to see some additional proposals on that.
Great.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, and this is kind of more of a practical question, but we have someone from the construction industry asking whether they should require staff or clients to wear masks. And obviously construction works differently than retail spaces, but I think on that broader question of our piece that you discussed, where we have about 1 to 2 years of kind of trying to get back to normal while we're waiting for a vaccine. So I was wondering if you could expand beyond that and just give us some insight into how these folks should be thinking about adapting their business operations in addition to PPE.
Yeah, so my immediate response is that we need to defer to the public health agencies. In my district, that's Tri-County Health. Because this is a health issue that needs to be science and data based. And every county and every industry or business needs to have a different response, right? So the overall challenge that we face is the same, but different counties and different cities have different levels of outbreak at this point of concern. And what would work for the healthcare industry would be different from the construction industry. And obviously heavy construction is very different from residential construction or road construction. So I would be remiss or I think I would just be out of place if I were to start providing dispensing medical advice, frankly, to individual industries or businesses as to what they should or shouldn't be doing with respect to their case or business. So that's why, the governor and the Safer at Home, what they have done, and I would encourage you all to go on to the website and look at the very detailed guidance that the governor's office and the state has put out, because they've taken the time to break it out by industry. So different industries have very different guidelines as to what they will and won't do. And then further, the cities have taken different steps depending upon the level of concern or outbreak within their city. So in Denver and Aurora and other places, still we have a little bit more restrictive lockdown guidance than the state as a whole. But in some places in southeastern Colorado and the western slope where they have very few cases, they have more permissive measures in place. So we have both geographic differences, but also industry differences within that. And I think that should continue to be driven by the local county health agencies and by the mayors of respective jurisdictions.
Perfect. Thank you. Alex, did you have one?
Yeah, a question just recently came in, and a woman was wondering what are the considerations or the discussions in the House to further expand the SBA microloan program. So that's a program for $50,000 and under in terms of loan amount, and expanding that program to support minority small businesses. And has there been any discussion to dedicate more PPP funding specifically to CDFIs or MDIs?
Yeah, great question. So let me start with that last one. We did do that actually last week. So we were very concerned that in Stimulus 3, a large amount of the PPP money was going to the larger financial institutions and to the larger businesses because they have easier access to banking than some of the CDFIs and smaller community banks and credit unions. We wanted to make sure that we had a separate set aside amount of money, a tranche of money that was allocated for those smaller lenders. And we were able to succeed in that. So we actually got $60 billion of that money set aside specifically for small and medium banks, community lenders, CDFIs, and others who will have that special set aside amount of money. So they're not competing with the larger banks for the larger tranche. So we did have success there. And in the microloan program, I agree with that. That's a tremendous program. And I think it's one that we should expand. I mean, the challenge always is finding support in the Senate to do so. They're less willing generally to want to expand those types of loan programs than we are in the House at this point. So there were some hearings and discussions earlier in this Congress and last year before the crisis came around about expanding those programs. But those discussions have largely halted in the last 7 weeks as we tried to address the crisis. but I will be pushing for them to restart. And of course, would always love to see the expansion of those programs.
Excellent. There's been a couple questions along this that have popped up, and I think it's fantastic. A number of licensed childcare providers and small business owners have joined. To kind of surmise what they're asking is what types of specific federal support should we be thinking about long term for this, with the understanding that obviously the Child Development Block Grant goes out, but is there anything that we can do to make sure that individual licensed providers, small centers, and potentially even large centers are getting direct grant assistance, just because those, among other businesses, run on extremely tight margins?
That's a great comment, and that's something that I actually would like to look into further. I don't have the answer to that right now, but what I do know is that child care centers are really going to be critical as we go forward here, because schools, as we know, are largely going to remain closed for the foreseeable future, certainly for the rest of this school year and into the summer. And as certain businesses reopen, and as the number of child care centers that are available, are minimized, because several of them are not opening up. Those who are open and operating, I think, are going to be inundated, are going to be really important to making sure they're providing child care to folks that need to return to work. Because it's one thing we are hearing a lot about in my district is this challenge of people being asked to go back to work in essential industries or in industries that are slowly reopening, but they don't have childcare, and their schools closed, and they can't rely on friends or family because of isolation policies, and it's putting families, particularly of school age and young children, in a very difficult position. So I will take this comment, and we will follow up and see what efforts are already underway and whether there's more that can be done to help stand behind and stand up some of those child care providers during this critical time.
There's also a number of questions coming in about EIDL and PPP, and in particular about how to apply for those, and what sort of documentation and forms are needed to submit those applications. I guess the question here is, what are the resources available for Coloradans and really for people across the country to get that small business assistance?
Yeah, so you can always contact our office first. We have a staff that's been working with folks, businesses in the community for several months now, helping them process, not process the applications per se, but assemble the necessary information and connect them with the right people. Some of the best resources, though, in Colorado are the small business development centers, the SBDCs, and there's two of them in the metro area. There's SBDC North, and then there's SBDC South, which is in Aurora. And they have counselors and they have staff standing by to actually help work businesses through eligibility and determine if you're eligible for certain programs, what you should be applying for, how to get your application together, and then connect you with eligible lenders. So these SBDCs are great, and you can always contact us, and then we can connect you with a relevant SBDC. But we are also we've held one SBDC forum already, where we had Angela Atkinson, the executive director of SBDC North, walk people through a long presentation about the different programs and eligibility. And we're going to be doing more of those going forward as well, just so that you all understand, the full menu of available programs and the eligibility.
Great. Thank you so much. So another question about the Triple-P, and specifically the terms for forgiveness and conversations around whether guidance or exemptions will be needed. Certainly there's stipulations around having payroll backup in 8 weeks. And there's a question here of a small business that's saying, not only are my employees scared to come back because of public health risks, my customer, we don't know if we'll have any customers coming back. So has there been conversations around those terms for loan forgiveness if due to public safety and public health, it's not possible to have your payroll back up and running fully in 8 weeks?
Yeah, this is going to be really important, and when we are discussing this with the Small Business Administration and the Treasury Department, we have provided the funding for these programs, but it's the Treasury Department and the SBA who have had to implement them and create the guidelines and the rules to govern forgiveness and eligibility. We are mindful of the fact that they've been very slow in issuing those guidelines and that guidance, and banks and lenders have not been given the guidelines that they need in order to disperse the funds, and that's slowed things down. Businesses have not been given adequate guidelines on eligibility for forgiveness, and that has slowed things down and created uncertainty for businesses. So there's a lot of problems here that we need to address, and that we've been pushing hard on the administration to get better guidance for. They're fixing some of them, and there is more clarity as we go, because as I said earlier, we have allocated hundreds of billions of dollars of additional money, and in a period of a week, the SBA, or several weeks, I should say, the SBA issued more loans than they had in a 10-year period beforehand. So the massive influx that they are dealing with, really with an infrastructure and an agency that is not designed and has the bandwidth to accommodate, has been very challenging for everybody, including, of course, the SBA and Treasury. But that said, it's their responsibility to provide the clarity and the guidelines that are workable for everybody, and they have not done that satisfactorily. So we are pushing hard for them to do it, and that underscores the need that I said at the beginning of the call, and that is the need for Congress to reconstitute the committees and to bring folks back who are healthy and can travel, so we can actually hold those hearings, call Stephen Mnuchin in to the committee hearing, call in the administrators, ask them the questions, and push them hard to issue these guidelines. And we need to be able to do that very soon. And I've been pushing leadership in the committee chairs to reconstitute those committees very rapidly.
Great, thank you. We appreciate your advocacy in this area. Absolutely.
So I want to go back to a question that was asked a little while ago, and kind of also put a forward-thinking spin on it too. So this person asked, what is being done at the state and federal level to prevent discrimination in layoffs and furloughs? And that's particularly distinctions between minority groups, women that have historically just had a more challenging workplace setting. And then is there any way we can think about addressing that now in a way that has some longevity beyond this crisis, and improves the employment outlook for these groups as well?
Yeah, I had a town hall yesterday with some labor groups and unions where this came up as well, about the issue of discrimination in the workplace, and existing issues that existed way before this crisis that are just being amplified by this crisis. Because one thing that crisis does is it takes vulnerabilities and existing problems and it amplifies them. And that includes discrimination in the workplace, that includes health disparities. Our communities of color are being significantly impacted, disproportionately impacted from both an economic standpoint and a health standpoint, because our healthcare system is broken. It doesn't work for too many Americans and too many groups. And the same with access to capital. Right? Even before this crisis, it was much harder for women and minority businesses to access capital and to enter the workforce and to start their own small businesses. And then, of course, with this crisis, that makes it even harder. So that's why the set aside money, that $60 billion for the PPP, was so important, to make sure that we were leveling the playing field in the near term. But we have to make sure that we are pressing OSHA to make sure that workplace safety concerns are still being addressed, and that we have competent administrators and folks at OSHA that are doing their job. The administration has not done a great job, in my view, of appointing competent agency heads in most instances, not every instance, but in most. And we have to make sure that we're holding OSHA accountable. We have to make sure that we're upholding our discrimination laws. I've signed on to a bill to make sure that we are not only maintaining but strengthening our anti-discrimination protections for employees. We have to do that. We have to make sure we're working with our union friends who actually are at the front lines of protecting workers and workplace safety and anti-discrimination laws as well in many workplaces, and I will continue to do that. So that's all of those things said. It is a concern, and there are a number of things that we are doing to work on it. Discrimination during furloughs is actually one other component of this as well, as folks are furloughed, and making sure that when those furloughs end, that there's an age, sex, or race discrimination when it's determined who is furloughed and who is brought back. So we have to keep our eye on that, and obviously the various agencies that have jurisdiction over making sure that those laws are enforced have to be held accountable. And again, that is yet another reason I will say why Congress needs to reconstitute the committees and hold those hearings, because the Department of Labor, OSHA, and others need to be held accountable for the enforcement of those laws.
Thank you, and I'll kick it over to Alex for the next one.
Yeah, there are a number of comments that are coming in about oversight and ensuring proper use of the PPP. So for instance, individuals that are claiming they have 5 employees and they are awarded the PPP loan, how do we actually know that those employees are retained on their payroll? And also, are larger businesses that don't qualify, are they somehow getting the PPP? So what oversight protocols are there, either you're currently working on or that are in place for the SBA's PPP program?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Oversight is going to be absolutely critical to this. I mean, we have passed now 4 stimulus bills amounting to almost $3 trillion, by far the largest bills and expenditures in American history, hundreds of billions of dollars going out the door just in PPP alone. So oversight is going to be really important. And that's going to take a couple of different looks. Number one, through the committee. And as I've said on this call a couple of times, and I hope you aren't getting sick of me saying it, it's so critical that these committees and the Small Business Committee reconstitute and we start doing those hearings that are necessary, so we can subpoena the banks. We can subpoena these large companies that have been accused of using this program improperly. We can subpoena the agency administrators and ask those really tough questions in front of cameras where the American public can see it, and we get answers and we hold people accountable. The next step is actually just yesterday, the speaker announced the Democratic members of the CARES Oversight Committee, and last week we approved the constituting of a new select committee whose job it will be to actually oversee all aspects of the crisis response here in the various bills and the money that we've spent. And it's going to be a bipartisan committee, and it's one that's going to look into all aspects of this, from discrimination to where the money is going to abusive programs. That committee may start meeting as early as next week and holding hearings to start looking into those issues, and that's going to be really important. The third is, we fought really hard in the original CARES Act back in March to make sure that we had an inspector general, an IG, who actually had subpoena and investigative powers to look into the proper use of many of these funds. The administration and the Senate actually didn't want to have it. They just wanted to give the money without any strings attached, without any oversight. We weren't going to allow that to happen. We were just not going to spend trillions of dollars of American taxpayer money without an independent watchdog with investigative powers to actually look into fraud, waste, and abuse. So we actually were able to get that done, and that IG exists. And now we have to make sure that that office will do its job going forward. And then the fourth would be Secretary Mnuchin, who just earlier this week has promised Congress that he will conduct audits of PPP and EIDL and these other programs, and that he actually came out and warned companies and businesses that if you're misusing this or trying to skirt the rules, that he's going to do a series of aggressive audits to ferret out that abuse, and has kind of given folks warning of that. So we are going to hold him accountable and make sure those audits are indeed being conducted so that that money is being used for the purpose it's supposed to be used for.
Thank you. So we're coming up on time right now, and I'm going to kick the last question over to Karen. But before we do, for the folks that are on in that question bar, there's a polls tab too. So please just before you log off, take the opportunity. I think it's not very many questions. it can be done fairly quickly. But with that, I'll kick the last question over to Karen.
Great. Thanks so much. Before I ask the last question, I just wanted to mention, just taking a look at the chat box, we are seeing a lot of folks who are typing in and saying that they're having a difficult time finding out the status of their EIDL application that they applied weeks ago, haven't gotten any notifications, can't get any answers about the status. And similarly, as you probably have heard, Congressman, folks are having some of the same issues with the IRS and their stimulus checks. So not necessarily our final question, but did just want to flag that that's an issue that it seems a lot of business owners are experiencing. For our last question, I wanted to kind of end it on a little bit of an optimistic question, one that I really liked. Where essentially some folks are saying, we're small business owners, we're here in Colorado, but we recognize this is a global crisis and a global problem. So what can we do as local small business owners to be global citizens at this time and to really address this issue internationally? And I thought that was a great question, because folks are dealing with a lot personally, but it's pretty inspiring to know that people are thinking globally and wanting to see our country be a strong citizen and partner right now.
Yeah, I love that question. And that actually, just the fact that question was asked is really inspiring to me, because it actually illustrates something that I've been saying the last few weeks. And as depressing as some of this news is, and as challenging as implementing some of these programs and getting through the red tape and trying to get clarity on these things, because they're just not working the way they need to be working. I think everybody admits that. And we need to push the agencies and the administration hard to fix the issues. And so as many problems as there are, and as difficult as this is, I've actually been encouraged by the community response. I've long said that I believe that we're best as Americans and as Coloradans when we rally together, when we focus more on what we have in common than what our differences are, and we come to each other's aid. And I've seen an awful lot of that happening the last few months. People really stepping up and donating time and money and volunteering for nonprofit organizations and delivering Meals on Wheels and text banking, the checking on senior citizens. Small businesses helping each other. I was just reading an article yesterday about a series of small businesses in the Denver metro area who have banded together to help each other out and provide aid and exchange supplies. Then they're doing this on their own. This has just, all demonstrated, how great we are as a community, and how when we come together and rally together, we can get through this. And it's going to be really, really hard, obviously, for all of us. But what I will say is, just continue to network and make connections with other businesses in your industry and try to figure out how you can help each other out. Whether you can refer clients or customers, whether you can share supplies and sourcing and get supply chain issues taken care of. Just come to each other's aid however you can, and pass along to the community. I'll end with this, that I think this whole situation, this pandemic and this economic crisis, really shows the extent to which we are all in this together, and good government matters. That it matters having people of integrity and honest folks, and having a government that works and it's effective. Because when it doesn't work and it's not effective, you see the consequences of that in a very real way. People get hurt. So making sure that you're holding elected officials accountable at every level, and that they're doing what they need to be doing to advocate for the business community and for everybody else is really important right now.
So, and we've just bumped up on time, Congressman. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer some questions about what's going on right now, what folks need to be thinking about in the future. So just for everybody, I know we didn't get to all the questions. We will be sending all these questions over to the Congressman's office. And again, I would encourage you that if you have continued issues or new things come up as a result of this conversation, to please reach out directly to Congressman Crow's office. There's a fantastic constituent service staff available to take those questions and help you work through that. I also, just as a pivot, want to flag that tomorrow, Small Business Majority and Good Business Colorado are hosting a webinar on financial planning with the Foundry Group and the Colorado Financial Assistance Network. And we will be continuing to reach out to elected officials across the state to get your voices in front of them. And I believe our next one is on Monday, Karen, with state representatives Colin Larson and Alex Valdez, who are both small business owners. And with that, Congressman, if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share, we really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you for convening the forum and for moderating. I really appreciate the opportunity. And then I'll end with, these are really complicated times and issues. We may not have the answer to all of them right away, but please do reach out to help, right? Or for us to help. You can call my office, you can email us. We have resource guides on our website as well, or contact the SBDCs, which have great staffs on staff available to you. But if we can't answer your question, we will help dig into it and figure out who can. And we're just standing by to help. It's a lot of what we're doing right now is just providing that direct service to all of you, and we'd be happy to do so.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us. And again, just everybody on this partner list is either a technical assistance provider, a community partner, or someone that can almost certainly help you with at least an aspect of your business right now, if not all of it. So please feel free to reach out. And with that, everybody have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.